I'll start by welcoming everyone. And, thank you so much for joining us for this first International Education at Queen's conference. Our goal with this conference is to recognize the importance of international education, celebrate the contributions of international students, and increase understanding of the international student, staff, and faculty experience and identities. I would like to welcome you to this session, Transitions. Today we'll hear from faculty and staff members who have international experiences and consider the realities and the individual journeys of transitioning into a professional position in the Canadian cultural context. The moderator of our panel today is Sultan Almajil, who is the director of the International Center. Before I pass it over to Sultan, though, I'll take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Alyssa Forstner. I'm here today with my colleague Lydia Schoolstad, and my pronouns are she, her. A little bit of a disorganized way of presenting that information, but I work at Student Academic Success Services, and I'll be moderating this session. So if you have any questions at any point, please send me a message in the chat and I'll do what I can to help you. I'll also be monitoring the chat for your questions for the panelists, and we can address those at the end. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from my home in Kingston, which is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And in our discussion that we're just about to get started, we're going to hear from folks who have joined Queen's from other cultures and have gone through this process of acculturating to the norms and expectations of a Canadian academic workplace. And so as I was preparing for this session, I was reflecting on how deeply rooted those norms and expectations still are in colonial practices and ways of thinking and knowing. And so at Queen's, as we continue at the university to work towards decolonization, I encourage you to join me in thinking about how the ways we interact with our colleagues and the ways we present ourselves professionally are informed by these Western Eurocentric notions of etiquette and respect and authority. And I hope you will join me in analyzing these and questioning the underlying biases and assumptions that we make about what it means to be a professional, how to interact professionally, and seek to take action where possible within our own roles to change the culture on campus. Now, we are recording today's session, so I will ask that you please keep your mics off unless Sultan or the other panelists invite you to participate. And as I said, I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, which we can address at the end. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass things over to Sultan.
Thank you, Alyssa. What an excellent introduction and start to this. I feel excited because we have three colleagues that I have met at different opportunities, and there is that professional identity that everybody brings forward, and this is an opportunity for me and for you to learn about their journey, from their journey to Canada and that transition to employment in Canada in post-secondary specifically. So I'm really excited to have you, Dr. Margaret, Dr. Derya. I see that you've joined us. Welcome. And last but not least, Jermaine. To get us started, let's start with a round of introductions. And if I may also ask you to include in your introduction a little bit about your journey to the academic world, professional academic post-secondary world. And there are a lot of, I'm sure, details in this journey that I invite you to maybe expand on, because everybody here will certainly find some of the small, what may seem small steps actually turn out to be leaps in your progress in settling into a new environment. So without further ado, what I will follow is maybe the list, how the panelists are organized. So I'll start with you, Margaret, with an introduction and a little bit about how you got here.
Thank you, Sultan. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are so excited that you're here. My name is Margaret Maliszewska. Students at Queen's call me usually Dr. Margaret because, you know, my last name is kind of hard to pronounce. And I work in the Department of Languages, Literatures and Cultures as an administrative assistant and academic advisor. I'm also a part-time faculty member here at Queen's. I received my first undergraduate and graduate degree at university in Poland. And then I came to Canada. I didn't come as an international student. I actually came as a permanent resident. So a lot of that paperwork that you, Sultan, mentioned at the beginning, I didn't have to worry about. So that was my, that was an easy kind of introduction to Canada as a permanent resident. And after I came to Canada, I did my second master's degree at the University of Toronto. And finally, I landed in Kingston to do my PhD here at Queen's. And so in the nutshell, the academic environment between Poland and Canada is totally different. Everything beginning from the coursework, you know, you have in Poland, you would have lectures throughout the term, no assignments, and then you would have 100% worth exam, usually in oral form. So you would sit one-on-one in a professor's office, no witnesses, and you would be asked to answer questions. Sometimes they would give you 5 minutes to think about them, or sometimes they would not. They would have to answer right away. So it's definitely very different from what we see, what our students see at Queen's and in Canadian universities, which doesn't, you know, for me at that time when I remember it, it was very stressful. But, you know, seeing students here, they stressed pretty much as well. So I think just the general at that age, doing academics and, you know, doing exams, doing coursework is pretty stressful on everybody, no matter what geographic location you find yourself in. So that's my introduction.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you for clarifying that distinction about international students and a permanent residence, because there are differences in that journey. And I do appreciate you mentioning that. The paperwork, in my view, probably is just as much. You maybe just did more paperwork before. But in terms of your experience as a newcomer to a new country, there might be some parallels that, and I'm hoping that we would dig into that once we're done with the introductions. I really do appreciate your comment about generalizing, you know, not generalizing when it comes to culture, because there are microcultures within, you know, what is perceived as, you know, one dominant country culture. So I really appreciate that comment. Jermaine, tell us about you and your journey.
Hi everyone, my name is Jermaine Marshall, my pronouns are he, they, and it's interesting because a lot of what has been said has gotten me percolating some thoughts, and already my introduction has shifted a little bit, but I often like to say that, you know, I'm a proud Jamaican, you know, as you can tell by these very colorful earrings that a friend of mine made me a while back. But I'm a proud Jamaican-born social justice educator with a passion for enacting change through the fostering of young minds and the implementation of equity-based institutional reform. My academic journey actually started studying law at the University of the West Indies, where I took a semester abroad in my final year to Ludlow Hall in New Brunswick. I did a semester there, and then I said, well, you know, I had always planned on leaving Jamaica because I am very queer, and Jamaica is in a very dynamic social battle right now with the changing norms and what it means to be queer in a country that was, you know, colonized by fierce Christian anti-queer sentimentalities. So I had always planned on leaving Jamaica, and it had always been more so a question of where would I go. And Canada had this, you know, persona of, oh, you know, LGBTQ+. I had a few of my aunts and uncles that had moved to Canada, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Canada. I did my semester abroad there, where I got a bit of a taste of some of those very different cultural components. It was one of my first introductions to, North American racism during that semester abroad, and sort of as somebody who had only experienced racism within like a former colony context, it was a lot happened that will probably thread through a bit of what I talk about in my response to some of these questions. But after that, I went on to do my master's in social justice and equity studies at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, where I worked for a while, both during the master's and then after I had finished the master's in their international center, as a TA, as a research assistant in their mental health programs. I worked for the Human Rights and Equity Office in as an intercultural assistant, as a sexual violence prevention assistant, as an anti-racism assistant. And I also work as a freelance performer, where I do a lot of vocalists and poet work. And my artistry seeks to create a vibrant soundscape that captures the contours of lived pain and joy within an oppressive society. So I've kind of been around in a lot of different areas, both professionally, academic, and sort of culturally, looking at the different spaces that I've inhabited. And it is really interesting to think about that point that has been raised. And I'm pointing to my left because I'm assuming everyone is in the same squares on my screen, but remembering that that may not be the case. But Derya mentioned, Professor Dr. Derya mentioned this idea of culture without the S versus cultures, and kind of how do we see, or even engage with the idea of dominant culture? Because right now I'm engaged in a lot of conversations with my Jamaican friends who are still in Jamaica, or some of them who are also in Canada or in America, other folks who have left for the purposes that they had to leave for. And this idea of when I talk to them, because I also went to an all-boys high school, which that is just a whole experience. But I went to an all-boys high school as a queer body in a country where queerness was considered contrary to what it meant to be Jamaican, especially as a Jamaican male, and sometimes recounting some of the events of the past. I'll be talking to some of them like, wait, that happened? I'm like, oh yeah, no, this was happening in this place all the time. And oh yeah, didn't you know that was, and they're like, wait, did we go to the same school? And to that point of, what was this experience? What defines the culture of a space? And are we sort of using the numerical majority as the definer of that? Or is there, a different approach to engaging with this idea of culture and multiculturalism that really allows for differential experiences to breathe? And as I know, Canada is right now very, very, very complicated, is the nice way to put it. Canada has a very complicated history with immigration. I think about the Komagatu Maru, I think about, and the name is slipping me, but it'll come back to me at some point, but just like a lot of Canada's historically racist and problematic immigration policies and approaches, and how now we're in this age where it's like, oh no, Canada is the place to immigrate to, 400,000 people immigrating a year is like the new goal of the government. They're like, we are going to revitalize our economy because we have an aging populace. Come one, come all, Canada is the place to be. But thinking about multiculturalism not as, a checkbox, we have diverse people here, but rather how do we interrogate the dominant systems and the dominant approaches that have defined our society up to this point? And now that we're bringing in folks from, all these different spaces, these different sort of cultural experiences and, ways of viewing and engaging in the world, are we looking at sort of cultural assimilation, or are we in the process of a project of radically redefining what does it mean to be Canadian? And that is some of the work that I find myself very interested in, which is why I'm so happy that I was invited to this panel. And I hope that that brief mini monologue that I have given has provided a bit of an insight into me.
Thank you, Jermaine. And I also just want to acknowledge that even though that you've just, each and one of you have taken a few minutes to introduce yourselves and the things that you have shared with us, I know that it's just the tip of the iceberg of a long journey. And I want to focus a little bit on the work environment, the professional environment, and our different interpretations of some of the values we hear. I mean, this session is called Transitions, and everybody may have, the context of the session is pretty clear, but using that as just a title may result in different interpretations. And the values in the workplace also, when we talk about professionalism or when we talk about etiquette, what is respect look like for me and for you? Those are things that I wouldn't say negotiated, but interpreted differently. So I want to know what your thoughts are, and what are some of the examples that you can share with us where some of those, you were faced with some of those values and there was a little bit of maybe a learning on your part and maybe educating those who were you were working closely with. And I open that to the whole panel to feel free to jump in. We don't have to go in a certain order. I just changed the rules on you. I know I did, but I know you can handle it. Jermaine.
I can start us off. This is something that I have, and it's interesting. The word negotiated, I like it a lot, because I think in a world where what means respect to one person does not mean respect to another, this idea of negotiations and this idea of, are we trying to create a sort of one-size-fits-all model for, what respect is and dignity is, or are we engaging maybe with more of a framework, certain guidelines and approach? Because in my experience within Canada, I am a 6'4", 6'8" when I'm wearing heels, Black individual who's read as male, when I enter into a space. And there are a lot of stigmas around, Blackness and danger, and, this idea of what does a respectful person look like. We call, the token minority, or, the respectable Black person who is, not angry, not these things. And growing up in Jamaica, I had a lot of, North American television. So I was able to engage with some of those narratives, and again, as a colony, there's some of these that echo in our own sort of culture. And so I was very fortunate to have a bit of a manuscript or a bit of a general guide when I entered into Canadian space as to, okay, how do I present as nice in the idea of what it means to be nice in this culture? But I know that from a lot of interactions that I've had, there is an extra labor that I oftentimes have to do in order to kind of deconstruct tensions when I enter into a room and sort of like reassure folks that, oh yes, no, I am a safe body. And within working spaces, that can be augmented in terms of both the difficulty and the repercussions of not being able to, be seen as somebody who is agreeable. This idea of niceness, oftentimes within the Canadian context that I've engaged with, there's this idea of you want to be seen as a nice person because, you're agreeable, people want to work on projects with you, if you're a person of too few words and folks don't know that you are nice, then it's like, oh, they're standoffish. They're, a lot of these terms come to refer to you. And so that's been a lot of my journey into the Canadian working world, which has been having to navigate that sort of, okay, I do not want folks to think certain things of me, so I have to perform a role. And yeah, no, it's been, and it's something that again goes to this notion of how much time I spend attempting to acclimate or attempting to navigate these spaces versus how much time does the space itself take, the space being the people, to kind of readdress how the space is organized. That has been a bit of my working experience here in Canada. And I have heard, I have been told that folks have thought that, folks thought you were standoffish that one day that they met you and said, oh, no, I was just tired. I once went to, and I was just tired. And the next day I heard, how, I thought you were like a standoffish person. I'm just like, why? Where did you get that? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. You made me think and reflect on an example as well, and I'll share this, is interpretation when it comes to extroversion and introversion. And what I've seen, and this is my experience, is that there's a lot of terms that are associated with extroversion in North America. Charismatic, outgoing, participate, but then there's not enough positive descriptions for introversion. But in some cultures, in particular the culture I come from, there's a lot of weight and value on introversion. So being quiet and not being outgoing and not being is highly respected. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It just clicked for me. I'm like, oh, I can think of an example of, group presence and group participation that I can share. as well. Thank you. What about our other panelists? Margaret, yes.
Such a great comment, Sultan, because, and Jermaine, thank you for that, kicking that off, because I have the same impression, like in Polish culture, we do not praise ourselves, Of course you can read, of course you can think critically, of course, this is just obvious. And when I came and I'm working in Canada, it's been very difficult transition for me because of that particular thing that I didn't know how to so-called sell myself, how to show people, like, of course I was doing all the things that were required of me, but nobody knew about that, because I'd never said anything. So it's just lovely, the observation about being extrovert and introvert. That's really, really great, and how is that negotiated in both cultures. Another thing that I can say, the biggest differences in values is that Polish academic, especially environment, is very hierarchical. There's lots, you would address your professor with the title and the last name, and they will always be doctor, even at the butcher shop, So it's something that also that Derya mentioned. So the very casual relationship between professors and students here, and also between co-workers, is something that I had to get used to. And it wasn't easy, as Derya also mentioned. It took me a few years to stop calling my PhD supervisor, Dr. Petra Fahinga. So So that was one that really jumped out of to me. And I've been very fortunate to work at one of the most diverse departments at Queen's, in the Department of Languages, Literature and Cultures. And we have instructors from all over the world, of different cultural heritage. So for me, it's been amazing to learn about different cultures and check in with my stereotypes and address them and correct them and adjust them. And I'm really, really happy to work in such a diverse environment, because Polish society is extremely homogeneous. So I feel the diversity, I cherish the diversity, I learn from the diversity. And I'm so happy to be here, because it's just so much enriching than just being surrounded by people from your own culture only.
Margaret, I just have a follow-up question, because I'm very curious, and I also do want to give Derya the opportunity to answer the question. But before that, how did you handle that? How did you overcome that challenge of, okay, you weren't able to market yourself or share the accomplishments in a way that the environment likes to see them? So what are the things that you've done to, I guess, to meet the demands of the environment, or meet them halfway? So I'm not sure, what was your approach?
Right. So it was a real struggle, and still is, because being introvert, I was only speak for myself. I also have low self-esteem when it comes to whatever I do. I always think I don't do enough, or not professionally enough. And I also have very distinct accent that I am very self-aware of, and I always think it projects negative judgment on me already if I'm speaking with an accent. So all those things really kind of were really in a way of me showing everybody how professional, how able I am. It comes with practice. Right now, I am confident in my skills, in my abilities. And I can say, yes, I did I wrote that project, I wrote that report, you know, versus, you know, before I would just here's your report, you know. I now I can claim the ownership of my work, but that kind of came with lots of practice and I think self-confidence in myself.
Thank you. Feeling more comfortable to say I did this rather than we did this, and picking the right time to do it.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. Anytime I'm on Zoom, I always alternate between the chat, the hand raising, the unmuting. I find it to be such a fun playground of different virtual engagements, but kind of connecting a little bit of that introversion, extroversion, and kind of the working world. I say this a lot, and folks, like a lot of my friends laugh when I say this, but the office is high school 3.0. If university is high school 2.0, the office, Jenny just said, but if university is high school 2.0, the office space is high school 3.0. And I think one of the things I've always found interesting is, and a lot of my work that I do, I'm a human rights advisor. I have a history of, you know, I do a lot of client-based work, consultations, sometimes crisis mat. Like I do a lot, but there is this idea that I think we have around this, you know, adulthood, and that it is so far removed from the chaos of the schoolyard. But in reality, it's reformated. It manifests in different ways. But in a lot of the work that I've done, I've kind of seen how, you know, when you have a space, especially a university space, universities being very unique and distinct in how our office cultures work, as opposed to, say, non-university spaces. But it's interesting to sort of think about that introversion, extroversion piece, that idea of selling oneself, who becomes better, who is more accustomed to these ways of selling oneself, who is aligned with, you know, the cultural expectations of, you know, are you a male? Are you white? You know, does the office already provide spaces for you to be pre-sold before you even begin the project of selling yourself? Terminology, but and when I think about international bodies and I think about international experiences, I once remember I was speaking at some event somewhere, I forget the place and the name of the event, but I said something around how it can be an interesting experience to know that your cultural difference is valued in a sort of, oh, you're from Jamaica, okay, that's the exoticism, the exoticization and the fetishization of not just the person, but the experience, and this idea of, oh, this is interesting. But then when you kind of go into like a space and those aspects of your Jamaicanness start to manifest, it isn't read in that sort of interest. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's cool. That's, oh, you know, this person is difficult. Again, those kind of descriptors that are used and attached to certain behaviors. And I oftentimes find it interesting because when, and there's a workshop that I do on interracial friendships and intercultural friendships and the work that is required to maintain those, because a lot of times conflict and tensions arise in the moments of miscommunications. And there is a mantra that we have right now in the public discourse around, you know, impact is the key, not intention. And yes, I agree. But I oftentimes find within, like, you know, interpersonal relationships or like these social microcosms like the office space, when we have multicultural folks where, you know, say I'm from Jamaica and we have our way of communicating in Jamaica, and say I say something that in my mind, you know, that was, you know, innocent, and, you know, I didn't do, like, I am operating as, you know, the day as I go on, and something has arisen that I don't even know about. Well, how does that then create a space where we don't actually have workspaces and school spaces that foster cultural differences, because we haven't created mechanisms to navigate those situations when they arise? Not to say that, you know, there is a huge shift that needs to happen, but also to say there is a bit of a huge shift that needs to happen. Sometimes when I hear those pieces around introversion, extroversion, and what is being attached, you know, Margaret, when you mentioned, you know, when you don't present yourself in that, hey, I know how to sell myself, it's, oh, you know, Margaret's just XYZ and LMNOP, and you don't even know that they're thinking of you in that way, because in your mind, you've communicated your value and your competency. So, and it's a bit jumbled, and I know I'm not wording it in the exact perfect way, but I think there is an interesting conversation that needs to happen in the office space around how are we deconstructing and, you know, engaging these moments of, you know, misunderstood meaning or, you know, misread intention, while also balancing the importance and primacy of impact. That's just a bit of a again, like a bit of a ramble, but yeah.
Not a ramble. You said it perfectly and in the perfect order, I think. I've have lots of questions now, but I also want to read, just highlight the comment that Alyssa put in, which does summarize, one piece related to your point is that we want to be able to say we have diversity, but in practice, we want that diversity to look and act like us. It's easy for similar people to follow the rules, right? Because they know the rules. And then when diversity comes to our workplace, then there are lots of things that needs to happen. One of them is, the new member may have to learn about this new environment again, right? Or hopefully also for the working environment to meet halfway. Now, I know, Jermaine, you have a few minutes and you have to head out. I hope you can be late for the other meeting and stick around, but if you need to leave, I won't say anything. So on that note, this was I guess a good segue to, okay, what do we need to do? How do we create those spaces? And I'm hoping that we can start with you, Jermaine, because of your limited time. But I want to know what your thoughts are on how to create those spaces where that connection can occur, and it doesn't really put similar ahead of everybody else. What are your thoughts?
So, and I do need to go at the time, so I am apologizing. But I think there are three, and not to sort of plug an event that's going on next week, but it's when you ask that question, there are three words that come into my mind: safety, vulnerability, and equity. And actually, I want to say four: empathy and equity. Because I think one of those key things is a workplace needs to be safe, right? You have to navigate what safety means, but at the same time, have space to engage with the fact that a workplace is filled with people with different cultures, cultural understandings, meanings, ways that they engage within the space. And the question is like, how do we create an approach to facilitate when these moments happen or when we're feeling these disconnects? It's not, okay, they need to now act like us in order for us to move forward, but sort of teasing out, okay, what happened here from the different perspectives. I oftentimes think of shows that will like do that one episode from the perspective of this character, and then you go through this episode thinking, yes, they're right, and then you go to the next episode and it's from the other character, and you're like, oh, there's complexity here. Why aren't they just talking? Why is there not a conversation happening here? And I think we need workspaces that do not punish vulnerability in the ways that our current working environments do, that don't sort of punish the humanness of being human, but instead create spaces for us to be human and to sort of be able to navigate some of these conversations and some of these issues with equity and empathy. And in a shameless plug, I know that Selena Cesar Chavez is doing a speech next week, a lunch hour speech on success, failure, and Black vulnerability, where she intends to kind of talk a bit about, in a dialogic manner, this idea of vulnerability and empathy, and not having it as individual components, but rather as the frameworks within which our office and corporate and professional spaces can operate in this changing world. And with that, I do have to run, but this has been amazing. Thank you all for having me. I look forward to engaging more. Bye.
Thank you, Jermaine. Really appreciate what you shared and those values of creating a truly diverse working space. Any thoughts from our panelists on what Jermaine shared, or what you want to add on how there can be a shift in the work environment to be more inclusive?
I think when I think about students, international students trying to or thinking seriously of entering job market in Canada, and what we can do for them at Queen's, what kind of resources they can access, I would definitely recommend going to career services. Because, like in my degree, it was a PhD in German language and literature. Okay, very useful degree in Canada. And I knew that I did not want to go into academia. I did not want to become a professor. And I wanted to, I would love to stay at university. Going to career services really showed me or taught me how many beautiful transferable skills I gained through doing PhD. Things that I use every day, like research skills, like organization skills, like communication skills. I apply them every day. You know, ability to work independently or in a group. These are all very important skills to have. But again, my personal self-esteem and being introvert, I did not realize that I have them. And how can I apply them? So I think career services is an invaluable resource to have. And I would recommend that to and I do recommend it in my capacity as academic advisor. Yes, you don't know what to do with your life, go to career services, they will help you. So in that sense, you know, if you are a graduate student, sorry, I was just waiting for my boss who was leaving. In my, for graduate students, School of Graduate Studies has lots and lots of resources for students who want to develop their skills or learn advance their skills. So that would be another. It wasn't at my time, and I don't want to age myself, so I will not say when was that, but I know that they have it now. And a lot networking is something that has to be done, unfortunately, because this is the Canadian way of doing things. And I was really close, you know, I was talking to people, but within my own department. And if I would have, like, I should have gone to all possible events at Queen's to meet people and to talk to them, to discover what's out there. So if I have any recommendations for international students, that would be something that I would suggest.
I will confess that I am blown away with how fast the time has gone. I can't believe we only have 4 minutes, and we can talk about this probably for another hour. I do want to open the floor to our guests if they have any questions to the panelists. Now is your opportunity, and don't be shy. If you want to ask a question, just click the one of the reaction buttons. I believe there's a raise your hand button there, and then I will call you by name. Any questions? Hannah.
Hi, everyone. I don't necessarily have a question, but I have a couple comments. As I have lived these experiences firsthand for a number of years, coming to Canada and then starting to work here at Queen's. Can talk a long time, but a couple of things. You mentioned the skills that we learn, that we have, and we point that out to students. And I think that really is valuable. That really works, and it's uplifting and empowering, and just reminding people of how much they know and the value they bring. So I would definitely support that idea. I used to really laugh at the item ability to learn. I was thinking, like, I learn a whole new language, whole new culture, whole new country. You know, I learn like a million things, and the ability to learn used to be quite a common requirement for a job description here in Canada. So I was like, yeah, count me in. So yeah, the list of skills is really good. And then how to do this, I think we tried a couple of things like this here at Queen's, where we reserve some time for people to talk about certain things, just like a lunch break or brown bag lunch break, or, you know, some sort of comfortable space. The Benry was really good for this. That had a topic of these intercultural sort of elements. And people had the opportunity to share and reflect, and then something maybe a little more structured. So then, you know, when we have these co-workers or team that works together. Even the members who necessarily would not come to these meetings would listen and learn about the other team members. And I think when we learn about the other team members, where they're coming from and their life experience, that really helps, you know. And also I find when we listen to others speak their mother tongue, their first language, all of a sudden there's this other person emerging. You know, I'm actually quite extroverted in my first language. And so being in this environment was always, I have to temper everything right down. So, you know, and this only comes in conversations. You can't quite tell that to coworkers or show it to them. So creating spaces for these conversations across units also, you know, breaking the silos and meeting people who work in other units, and creating the time to do this, as time is always short. I think that would be helpful if you can do something like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And I want to thank our panelists for your time today. This is almost a full hour. We have one more minute. So I will invite Alyssa to close the session. I just want to sincerely thank the panelists and the guests for attending today. And I look forward for more conversations like this in the future. Over to you, Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Sultan. This was wonderful. If you were watching the chat, you saw how engaged I was and how much I enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for everyone who joined us today and has joined us for International Education Week and the first International Education at Queen's conference. As I said at the beginning, we're very hopeful that this becomes an annual event. So you can see I put a link to our feedback form in the chat. Please take a moment to fill that out. It will help us figure out how we can continue to celebrate international education next year and in years to come. And tomorrow we have a live recording of our International Voices at Queen's podcast. So I hope you tune into that. And that's it for today. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.